Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast in association with eBay Motors Group. It is now Saturday, the 30th of May, and you're joined by myself, Philip Nothard.
And me, Curtis Hutchinson. So we're at the end of the month.
Where's that gone?
And more to the point, we're getting very close now to restart date, which is this Monday.
It is,
for
yeah.
England.
Yeah, I mean, this is our 352nd podcast episode, and we're heading now into the 11th week of lockdown. I mean, you just didn't even ever think you would hear that, would you? In terms of that, one, the lockdown as a reference, and two, that we're heading into the 11th week of lockdown. But as you say, I think for the automotive sector, we have got that first date for England, which is the 1st of June. So people listening to the podcast this morning will be hopefully in a position ready to open. I know the dealers have been actively getting things ready, and we'll touch on some of it as we go through this week's headlines. But everyone's been fairly busy, haven't they, over recent weeks as they've been working to different dates. But obviously they have got the official date now, which is 1st of June, where they can open to the general public.
Yeah, and we've actually got a bit of an update because, as you say, it's for England. So we have got a little update on what's happening with Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Although, bearing in mind, everything's fast changing at the moment, so it's up to date at the moment. So we'll see what actually happens over the coming weeks.
Definitely. But we have got an exclusive that we can share. We have got an exclusive podcast that we'll be doing on Monday, which I think is the 11th, if I'm correct, of the COVID-19 specials. So that's coming up on Monday. So you need to stay tuned on Monday for that one.
Yeah. Are we going to tell them who it's with?
No,
we're going to keep it up our secret.
No, but it's a good one. It's very timely for the 1st of June reopening. And obviously it'll be talking about some financials and activity and what's been happening throughout lockdown as well. So it's a bit of a mixture of a commercial financial update as well as activity throughout lockdown and plans going ahead from now, the 1st of June. So it'd be well worth tuning in on Monday and listening to that one. But we have got some good headlines today. I mean, it's as always with the weekly podcast. I mean, some weeks before lockdown, we were always trying to find the good headlines throughout everything that was coming out. But recently, on a week by week basis, it's trying to slim it down, isn't it? There's that many headlines on a daily basis coming out.
Yeah, exactly. And the main headline this week will be around the reopening on Monday. But over and above that, we've got some figures actually from eBay Motors Group in terms of what's happening for searches and leads. We've got an acquisition, and we haven't had an acquisition story for a long time, so we'll let you know who that's with. We've got an update on Hertz because that particular story generated a lot of interest during the week about Hertz in the US filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. So we'll look at the ramifications of that. And we've got another update on Trevor Finn and what he's been up to recently and who he's been talking to.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, let's say it's an interesting time at the minute, but lots of things coming out. But as you say, I mean, the main story that has been running all through the week has been the government to allow car showrooms in England to open on the 1st of June, and the story that we've picked on this week has been in Autocar, and obviously focusing on the dealerships, as we sort of said earlier, that they've been given the green light to open on the 1st of June, as long as they've obviously got the guidance and the protocols in place, and there is documentation that I believe the dealers need to get signed off by an employee of the business that they put sufficient processes and sanitisation in place for both the colleagues to return to work, and obviously customers entering the place of work as well. So it's a good news, but it's not just I think it's the first stage, isn't it, with everything that's been going on.
It is, yes, yeah, and obviously our special interview on Monday will shed a lot more light on what's actually happening. But yeah, it's an interesting story. This it sort of outlines what's happening in England. But as we said at the beginning, there's different rules applying for Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales. So following on, the next headline is actually from the Daily Record up in Scotland, and the headline there is Scotland's car dealers are raring to go. And this is actually based on an interview they did with Sandy Burgess, who's the head of the Scottish Motor Trade Association, and he's been lobbying hard for showrooms to be reopened. He's been in conversations there with Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, and you can sense in this piece his frustration, because he makes the point that workshops are already able to function and are well equipped to prepare for this safe environment that's required in showrooms, and he wants that to be rolled out naturally for showrooms. So he wants some clarity there, and he's also asked the Scottish government to allow a click and collect system, such as the one that's already being run in England, to be operational in Scotland. So clearly he wants both done now.
No, you're right, and I think the associations, the industry associations, I mean, throughout, they've always done a great job for the sector anyway, but I think they've really proven themselves throughout this. I mean, on that last story there, with Sue Robinson from the National Franchise Dealer Association, working effortlessly with the SMMT to lobby government for the click and collect and the showroom opening and that taking place there. It's been a positive and a vital move for the industry in England. And as you say there, with Sandy now from the SMTA, working with the dealers up in Scotland, and one of the most prominent ones up there is obviously with Arnold Clark's as a Scottish motor dealer. But again, working hard to try and get some restriction lift so that they can get sort of the stimulus moving again within the car dealers up in Scotland. And you do wonder, don't you, because today we're talking and you think about Ireland, you think about Wales, and we're talking here about Scotland, but they're all doing things slightly differently, aren't they? And you've got some information on sort of your views on the Northern Ireland and the Welsh restriction lift opinions at the minute. So there's a lot going on, isn't there?
Yeah, well, there were not so much conflicting reports, but just sort of a lack of clarity as to what was happening in Northern Ireland and Wales. So I got in touch with the National Franchise Dealers Association, and Gabrielle there gave me an update. So his update is that within Wales, the First Minister is due to make an announcement on the lockdown measures and how they'll be eased. But the thinking is that car dealers are most likely to be part of the amber category, which will allow non-essential retail sites to open with physical distancing. So let's hope that's soon, especially once showrooms open in England, and let's hope the same measures will be applied there. With Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland executive announced on Thursday that new and used car retailers would be allowed to open from the 8th of June. So they've got a date, which is great. So let's just hope Wales and Scotland get their dates soon.
Yeah, and as you say, I mean, it's we've got it may be a case that actually once the English dealerships open on Monday and prove that they have got social distancing measures in place and the activity can take place, then maybe it is that the Scottish, Northern Ireland and Welsh can follow fairly quickly, as you know, we've gone first with this. So again, we'll hopefully see that, you know, is this the first of the others sort of starting to lift their restrictions and following very quickly. But you do feel that it will start to happen fairly swiftly now on the back of this on Monday. So one that we'll certainly watch. But we have got some activity update from eBay Motors Group, and this is on some of their sort of market view report that they publish on a regular basis, and looking at some of the sort of the lead and activities coming through their platform. And it certainly does demonstrate that there is appetite out there, and we're on the up curve, aren't we now, in terms of activity, leads, and inquiries coming into the sector.
Yeah, definitely. And the data does show that for the last 3 weeks, lead activity has grown, and for the last week, which was week beginning the 18th of May, leads generated by the eBay Motors Group sites were actually up 19%. So that's showing the strength of interest out there. And indeed on car searches, that they've produced some data on that, showing that week on week searches for both used cars and cars for sale have increased. So the movement of direction there is very, very positive, which is great. And I think it's been helped by the various announcements about easing of lockdown and enabling potential buyers to start thinking about any purchases that they may have had on hold.
No, you're right, and I think, you know, it kind of reflects a lot of the Google mobility trend data that's been published, for the government around lockdown in the UK compared to other countries. But, you know, we did see that steep lockdown. I mean, their data is starting week 10, which is week commencing the 2nd of March, and sort of showed that week by week started to slow down a little bit, but obviously hit the bottom point, which is week 13. But again, you know, you start to see that little bit of an increase in activity week on week. Dipped off a little bit in week 19, but then, you know, went up again quite heavily in terms of week 20, and then obviously we're now in week 21 that they're referring to, and like you say, up 19% from last week. So again, showing that activity leads coming through the platform into the dealer network. And anecdotally, you know, I've been getting some feedback of sort of inquiries coming into businesses and online sales starting to take place. So hopefully, you know, we get 1st of June on this Monday, they can start to get a lot of these cars handed over and started to get through some of the backlog at a quicker rate than they've been able to up to now. So one that we'll be watching very closely. I think you talked about the next story at the start, that, you know, we went through a period, didn't we, where it was continual acquisition,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
you know, we haven't seen, for obvious reasons, any of that in recent weeks. But we have got one, and it's in motortrader.com, and this is where Richmond Motor has acquired Newman Suzuki down in Southampton. So it looks like that this is a single Suzuki operation down in Southampton, that has now been bought by the Richmond Group, which will take their business up to 14 franchise locations, along with a used car supermarket as well, across that sort of southwest of London through to Portsmouth and Southampton. So again, a great acquisition at a very timely moment as we start to see some kind of restriction lift.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we've covered Richmond Motor on the podcast before, because they have grown in recent years by acquisition. They've, I'm pretty sure they started with a substantial Hyundai business in Portsmouth, and they've grown from that to, as you say, 14 franchise locations around the south. So this is a good fit for them, Suzuki in Southampton. It's good acquisition there.
And it's good that I think for again, you know, we've got the interview ahead on Monday, but I think, this is partly demonstrating that there is appetite out there. There is businesses that are wanting to continue to grow. There's a statement there coming from Richmond that they do have plans to open further 4 franchise car dealership locations within the next 18 months. So, there's all this going on at the minute. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of challenges faced across the sector, but there are businesses that are out there that are already thinking for future strategies in terms of acquisition and growth plans that are in place. And they're rated currently 93rd in the Motor Trader top 200 dealer groups, with an estimated turnover of 140 million there. So again, great move. Very sad to see that someone like Newman's are exiting the business or the sector, but they have said, there's a quote there that from Newman's joint managing director Guy Foster said it's not been an easy decision to exit the business, particularly after 3 years of record growth and winning several industry awards. But he has offered to stay on for the handover and to work with the new owners throughout a short period of time to make sure it goes smoothly. So again, great news that there is growth. Sad to see somebody leaving the sector, but again, it's been taken on, and Richmond's will obviously take those employees on and move forward, and have got growth plans as well. So great news for those.
Yeah, and sort of linking to that story in a way is the next headline from Car Dealer, which is Progress Suzuki Dealer Group founder issues plea to help find employees jobs as business goes under. And this is a sad story really, because Progress Suzuki, an established player, it's gone into receivership after nearly 14 years, and its founder there has made an appeal actually on LinkedIn to industry colleagues to help find work for his employees. So it was Terence Byrne who actually established Progress, and based in Bedford, and that's dating back to 2006, and he's he has got a good team there, and he's looking to find them work, ideally in the sector.
Yeah, and recently, back it's only early 2019 that they did sell some of their Skoda dealerships to Marshall Motor Group, and I think that was obviously part of the interview that we did last year with Dash, with the growth within that Skoda brand. So yeah, it's sad, and let's hope that many of these staff do get taken on, as I'm sure they will, within and kept within the sector. So again, very sad to see these things happen.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out that in his post he actually did cite the impact of COVID-19 and the way it's hit the business hard, and he's now reaching out to car retailers in the Northamptonshire, Buckinghamshire and Bedfordshire areas to see if they've got any vacancies for his staff.
Yeah, let's wish them luck with that one.
Yeah. So you're listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast in association with eBay Motors Group, the only weekly podcast serving the car retailing sector, and available online at motortraderadio.com, and by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Deezer and SoundCloud. Now, next story, we're heading over to BBC News. It's a big one. The headline is Hertz, car rental firm, files for US bankruptcy protection. And the ramifications of this potentially are enormous, because Hertz is a significant international player. The story makes it clear that its operations in Europe, Australia and New Zealand will not be affected, but filing for Chapter 11 protection, the message this sends out to the market is that this is a rental daily rental giant,
Yes.
who is struggling as a result of COVID-19, because of course, who's renting cars at the moment? With businesses and people in lockdown, the rental sector has taken a massive hit, and the implications here are stretch across OEMs who will had guaranteed markets for cars with rental companies such as Hertz. And of course, if you look at the wholesale sector, that's where these cars enter the used car market. So we're talking significant numbers here potentially.
Yeah, I mean it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because these, in terms of the rental companies, it's about utilisation of that asset. That vehicle needs to be out on the road. It needs to be having a daily revenue earning from its use. And when you get these kind of things, you can understand it. From a consumer perspective, not renting, from the, like you say, the air travel sector as well, which is obviously huge over in the US there. And it does send out a message that there is challenges. And within some of the stories that sort of surrounded this in recent weeks, when the conversation had first started, it was a case that new car orders were being cancelled. Questions whether that's been cancelled by the rental leasing companies or being cancelled by the manufacturers, because at the end of the day, there is, throughout this 10-11 weeks worth of lockdown, there's been factory closures, etc., that has obviously halted production of product. I think I saw something before recording today that I think there was 15 LCVs being produced in April or May or something. I think there was something out from the SMMT. So you can see the impact on this, and that if some of these large leasing rental companies wanted product, if for any reason they wanted to replenish some of the product, that would the new cars be there to supply to be able to do it? Probably not. And there are reports that we're starting to see releases, and potentially you're going to see some of this rental product that should have been coming into the wholesale market not, because it'll be remain on rental when they need to do it, or going into different sectors of the market. So again, there's things like flexi rent that's out there and things like this that we'll see what will come of these kind of things. But again, like you say, it's the start of potentially more things to come. And as you say, there's been a lot of questions this week about the impact within the UK, but as you say there at the start of this story, Curtis, that Hertz have made it clear that it is its international operations, as you say, Europe, of which I think they class in the UK as part of that Europe, and the franchise locations within the US are not affected. This is purely the rental operation or in the US that have been affected. But some big numbers in there. I mean, they're talking there, its chief executive has resigned last week. And then they're talking about US to borrow a record $3 trillion in pandemic spending. And the Fed over in the US are warning of a slow recovery without more virus aid. So again, some big impact over in the US there from COVID-19.
Yeah, and the story does actually go on to say that even before the pandemic, the company had amassed billions of dollars in debt, and it does actually cite the competition that it was getting from the rise of the ride-hailing apps, leading to a drop in demand for car rentals. Interesting to see where that model goes in the future, because of course we're sort of venturing into unknown territory now.
We are, and moving on from that, because the story in the Financial Times there, that car makers should emerge greener from the crisis. So again, Financial Times there thinking about obviously the impact of COVID-19 on the sector and how it will change the landscape of the sector going forward. In terms of that global issue of April, May, in terms of that drop in sales through the market and what impact that will have on future growth, and that sort of EV world as well, in terms of margins under pressure, expensive shift into electric vehicles. So quite an interesting story, this one from the Financial Times.
Yeah, it is. It's an interesting deep dive into the state of play in car manufacturing across the world, and it does pick up on a number of themes that we were exploring, before March, when we were covering headlines on what was happening out there in the sector and trends before the lockdown started. So it makes the point that even before the pandemic struck, car makers face plenty of challenges. So, sales in key markets were already in decline. And this whole new emissions, the move towards new emissions regulations were forcing an expensive shift to EVs, and margins were under pressure as a result. So it's an interesting summary of where the car manufacturing sector is now. And within the piece, it's sort of speculating on workforces being reduced in car manufacturers, and indeed, on the day that we're recording this, Renault have announced that they're shedding 15,000 workers. So it's an interesting insight into what is a fast changing story.
Yeah, and I think you've got to put, let's say, you highlighted there, Curtis, that the new car market had its challenges. We've been talking about WLTP, the RDE, the CAFE regulations that were hitting as well. So the new car market was changing. It was against some headwinds. It had some issues. There was a lot going on in that sector, and this has kind of added very heavily to that. So whereas the used car market, you shut down, out at the other end and start trading again, you can get some sort of continuation. But that new car market, it's certainly not going to recover quite as quickly as the used car market. I mean, it's going to have an impact on the used cars, no doubt, but it's going to take a long time for that sort of production lines to get back up to some kind of normal levels. But again, what is the normal level? Because it wasn't normal before we went into lockdown, was it? There was a lot going on. So again, sort of showing that the ramifications of some of the changes that these OEMs have been facing as well over the last sort of 2 or 3 years, essentially. Really, it's been going on for, hasn't it?
Yes, yeah. So our last story this week is from Car Dealer, and the headline is ex-Pendragon CEO Trevor Finn in talks with big motoring world's Peter Waddell over used car business. This is a fascinating story. I really enjoyed this one, and there is an accompanying video of an interview that Car Dealer did with Peter Waddell, who's the boss of Big Motoring World. And it's quite interesting because it's a general interview about how the business is performing, what it's been doing during lockdown and plans. And Peter reveals that only, I think, the previous day, or certainly during that week, that he'd had a visit from Trevor Finn. Now, listeners will recall a couple of weeks ago we ran a story based on Trevor Finn's LinkedIn post saying that he was returning to the sector after, I think it was probably about 18 months out after leaving Pendragon, and he'd spotted an opportunity in the used car market that he was going to explore and return with. So my take of this is that he is researching the market. In his LinkedIn post at the time, he mentioned that he'd been around the world looking at different businesses, and I think this is part of the research process. So he did actually visit the site in Peterborough, which is the base of Carzam, which is Big Motoring World's online used car retail business, and it's a massive site. It's big enough to store I think it's something like 8,000 vehicles. It is big. It is big. And Peter's talking about giving Trevor a guided tour of the site, and Trevor being incredibly impressed. So what did you make of this one?
Yeah, I mean, I did watch all the interview that James Bagger, and he's been doing some cracking interviews. We've got
Yeah.
hat tip James on some of the work he's been doing throughout this lockdown period. I mean, so he's got some fantastic interviews there, and I didn't expect anything less from Pete there. He's fairly open and honest as Pete Waddell is. But yeah, it was interesting. I think it gave his aspiration of what he was doing, why he was doing it, where he came from, where he saw the market. He talked around that. They talk about Kazoo and what Alex Chesterman has been doing at Kazoo and their view on that from a big motoring world and from a Kazam perspective as well. But like you say, I think we're watching that one where Pete obviously then referenced that he'd met with Trevor, because he was talking through some of his peers within the sector of who he, because James asked him the question of who he looks up to, who are his peers within the automotive sector, and I think that's where it sort of led into the conversation around Trevor there. But like you say, Trevor has been open in his LinkedIn that he is exploring opportunities within the used car market, which obviously gives the intent of his return. And we've spoken many times, haven't we, about senior leaders that have left the sector for one reason or another and find it very difficult to stay away. And Trevor's going to be no different than that. He is a used car operator through and through, and it will be very difficult for him to stay away in any form from the sector. So I think we're naive to think that he would stay away from the industry. But again, very interesting that whether he's met with Pete for investigative reasons or not, I don't know. But and whether Trevor thanks him for saying it or not, I don't know. But he did. And it's out there, and very interesting. And
I thought it was interesting that Peter, obviously running a hugely successful used car supermarket business there, and he said that over the course of the meeting, which lasted for 3 hours, he learnt a lot from Trevor. So there was a free flow of ideas there. And in the piece on Car Dealer, James does actually say that if you fast forward to 24:40, you can see that part of the interview, because it is quite a long interview. So do dip in, and it is a scoop. It's a good old fashioned scoop. So well done, James, on that.
Exactly. So that's it for this week. Let's say we've got good interview due to come up. We've got no idea. It's not been recorded yet. So we've got no idea in terms of the content and the direction of conversation, but it's one that will be recording on Monday, and it'll go out immediately. So again, tune in and watch out on the social channels on Monday for that we've got coming. But again, you just see now that 1st of June, it's going to be a case of now, look, what happens following this opening now of the car dealerships. How soon will Wales and Scotland follow the England restriction lift? What will happen in Northern Ireland as well as a consequence of this? And then what impact that will have on other retail sectors and how quickly things will, because there are dates already been given for other retail sectors, haven't there? But these things can change depending on how things go on Monday in many ways. If it goes well, then if both retailers and the consumers can demonstrate that they can interact in a social environment through the guidelines, then what could that mean after that? So one that I'm sure we'll be watching very closely, and so will the trade media.
Yeah, so that's all for this week. You've been listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. Many thanks for listening. Do join Philip and I again next weekend for our look at the headlines, and do look out for that interview on Monday with the industry leader. It'll be very, very relevant because we'll record it Monday morning, the day that showrooms reopen across England. So until then, stay safe and stay well, and it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.